Thank you all for joining us this evening. This is the Munroe-Meyer Institute Family Care Enhancement Project Information Series on managing funds and benefits. My name is Rhonda Heights, and my co-host tonight is Jennifer Hansen. We are both part of the Family Care Enhancement Project, which consists of parent resource coordinators who are parents of children with special health care needs or disabilities who help other families navigate resources and services for their child or their families as well. We are part of the Munroe-Meyer Institute, but are located all over the state of Nebraska. As you can see, these are our team members. We've got folks that are all across the state and a number here in Omaha, but also Kearney, Lincoln, and Norfolk, as well, and Scottsbluff as well. If you'd like any more information or would like to find out anything in addition about this presentation, you can contact either myself or Jennifer at these email addresses. So tonight, a few housekeeping items. We are recording these sessions, so if you would like to go back and review any of the information, this will be posted on our website, which is located here, the link. It usually takes me a couple of weeks to get the video edited and uploaded, but that'll be there on the video library, as well as past sessions that we've had on different topics as well. We do ask that everyone please keep their computer muted. That way we can have a better flow. We won't worry about people talking over each other, but please do submit any questions or comments to the chat to Jennifer Hansen. And at the very end of the session, there will also be a poll to complete just to give us some feedback to see if we're really hitting the mark and if this was a good topic, if this was something that was helpful for you, and if there's any suggestions that you might have for future sessions. So tonight, I'm really excited to introduce both Shauna Dahlgren and Shawn Newill from the Easterseals of Nebraska. They're going to be sharing with us information about how to manage funds and benefits when you may be someone who has a disability and are trying to make sure that you don't lose some of your services and benefits like Medicaid or some of those long-term services, basically giving us some information on how to do that and make sure that we stay out of trouble, so to speak, and kind of head that off and know that we're doing those things properly and for our loved one and taking those things into consideration. So without any further ado, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Shauna and Shawn.
Shauna, are you able to unmute?
Yep, I am unmuted now. So I am Shawn Newill. I will just introduce myself. Miranda did a wonderful job of introducing us, but just give everybody a little bit of a background information on my title here at Easterseals. I am a work incentive specialist, and I work primarily with the transition age and young adult youth. And we assist with benefits planning, of course. We will look at benefits if somebody is already receiving Social Security benefits, help them to better understand and determine what benefits they're getting, what associated benefits they may have or may be eligible for, and understand the impact and effects that work and further education might have on those benefits, as well as perhaps explore some benefits that they're maybe not receiving but could potentially receive. Provide those resources and help with application assistance for those benefits if needed. And Shauna, did you want to share information about yourself and your title here too?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can introduce myself now. My name is Shauna Dahlgren, and I too am a work incentive specialist. And so kind of ditto what Shawn has already said as far as assisting Social Security, disability, and SSI beneficiaries with the benefits counseling services and understanding the implications of work. And then also with just exploring the benefits for which people may be eligible. But I also do a fair amount of public outreach and also do some advocacy work. So at Easterseals, we really do try to be involved in kind of groups or conversations that ultimately have an impact for individuals with disabilities and allowing them to make informed choices about different things, make informed life choices, I guess, and just ultimately live a better quality life. So I will go ahead and let Shawn talk the first part here, and then we'll switch over to me.
Perfect. So again, tonight we'll be covering Social Security, transition age youth and young adults, and discussing how work is possible and how to best utilize benefits and the work incentives that are possible in both programs. Rhonda, if you want to go ahead and forward. Our agenda, again, overview of Social Security and the two different disability programs, so SSDI and SSI. We'll talk about special considerations for those transition age youth and young adults, discuss the importance of benefits planning services, and then Shauna later will also discuss the Social Security work incentives, the different incentives in both programs, SSDI and SSI as well. If you want to go ahead and advance. Right. So again, Social Security disability programs, there is Title II, Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI. And this also includes CDB, or childhood disability benefits. The SSDI program, or Title II program, is funded by the trust fund. It's an entitlement program that's based on the wage earners or insured status and their work history. It can insure the wage earner or worker, of course, their widow or widower, and also their disabled adult children. After 24 months of eligibility to SSDI, the person becomes eligible for Medicare insurance. The Title 16, or Supplemental Security Income, or SSI, is funded by federal tax dollars, not the Social Security Trust Fund. It's a needs or means-based program for aged, blind, and disabled who have limited income and resources. This program also comes with Medicaid insurance, so the difference between Medicare and Medicaid. And because it is a needs-based or means-tested program, it is always going to be the payer of last resort. Thank you. You can go ahead and click through that one, Rhonda. Thank you. Eligibility. So we will discuss today both the definition of disability in the Social Security program for a child, so somebody who is under the age of 18, as well as later we'll discuss the definition of disability for somebody who is over the age of 18. The definition by Social Security Administration, or SSA, of a child is somebody under the age of 18. And we look at 18 because it's federal program. So in the state of Nebraska, though that age of majority is 19, because Social Security is a federal program, that age is going to be 18. They have to have a medically determinable physical or mental impairment, which results in marked or severe functional limitations, has to be expected to result in death, or last or expected to last for a continuous period of 12 months or beyond. Broad areas of functioning for this can be in acquiring and using information, attending or completing tasks on their own, interactions and relating with others, moving or manipulation of objects, and caring for themselves. So when we say caring for themselves, thinking about those adult daily living, kind of independent living needs, and then their own health and physical well-being. When somebody is under the age of 18 and applying for or receiving Social Security, there is deeming from a parent to a child. So the parental income and resources would be considered and Social Security calls that deemed, sorry, as I'm making air quotations, to the child. And then that is factored in to their SSI eligibility and would affect the amount of benefit that they would receive as well. Deeming, of course, is based on that concept that people who have a responsibility for one another share both their income and resources. So in this case, when we talk about parent to child deeming, of course, a custodial parent or guardian is going to care for and provide their resources to their child. Thus, they count the income of the parents when they are determining whether or not somebody under the age of 18 is going to qualify for that supplemental security income benefit. I'll go ahead and move on, Rhonda. Thank you. A representative payee is a determination that can be made as well as somebody can be appointed through Social Security. Of course, again, when we talk about persons who are under the age of 18, typically it's going to be their parent or their assigned guardian if it is not a parent that would be appointed as the representative payee for them. However, that is not always the case. A representative payee can be a family or a friend, and that can apply for both adults or children, as well as if there is not a family, friend, parent, or guardian that can be that representative payee. There are agencies that can be assigned as the representative payee for a beneficiary. The representative payee is responsible for monitoring and managing that benefit that is received from Social Security and making sure that it is used for the beneficiary's basic needs. So food and shelter, those types of things. They will also be responsible for reporting to Social Security on an annual reporting, similar to a little spreadsheet that Social Security actually will send out annually, and they report where the funds were spent and how they were spent. Of course, the representative payee that is assigned is the person that would be responsible for doing that for the beneficiary on an annual basis. So we'll use this to talk about record keeping and the importance of doing that, both, well, actually three points here, but for monetary reasons as far as the representative payee responsibility. So that first bullet point of, again, talking about annual and financial reviews, but also the importance of keeping records for medical. Medical reviews are done on a continuing basis, and we will sometimes see a year, 3 years, 5 years, or 7 years generally that somebody is on a continuing disability review based on their diagnosis and determination. So it's important to have not necessarily all of the notes that you might have from every single visit with your physician, but keeping track of the most recent physicians so that when that continuing disability review or an age 18 redetermination comes up, if Social Security is in need of information that they can collect that will show current diagnosis and any difficulties that you might have that can attest to that diagnosis, you can provide them with the names, addresses, phone numbers, and such of where they can collect that information for medical. It's also important to keep track of any work earnings if somebody is making work efforts and has earnings, so that those can be reported to Social Security, because earnings are also going to affect benefits in different ways. And we'll talk about those later when Shauna talks about work incentives. But development of earnings is another thing that we want to keep records for Social Security to report to them. Go ahead.
We've had a couple questions come in quick.
Okay,
if that's
sorry.
okay. So the first one is with the SSA disability determination, is there a tool or a level that they use, like a checklist, or how do you know how that is done?
As far as Social Security making the determination?
Yeah, the
or,
disability determination.
when somebody applies for Social Security, the DDS, Disability Determination Sector, reviews that application and would request, based on the information that the applicant provides, they're going to request medical records from physicians, psychologists, psychiatrists, anything that exists, as well as if there's school records, they will request from the school as well, and use all of that information to make the determination on their diagnosis and whether they meet the criteria that we talked about as far as meeting that 12 months or longer and having one of those diagnoses that meet those. Does that answer that, or is there more to that? I felt like that could be a two-part question.
And then the second one, is the parent's income still considered deemed to the child if the child is 20 but still living with the parents?
No. After the age of 18, the parental income for Social Security is not counted as deemed to them any longer.
This is Shauna. Can I just add something? Sorry, I was
Go ahead.
on mute for a second. So I was trying to add something to the question about the disability determination, that medical determination. Just generally speaking, they, especially for when it's an adult determination, there is a sequential evaluation process that they go through that the disability examiner uses. And so it really is truly based on what work experience the individual has. And when they're young, they may not have actual work experience, but they go through basically a 5-step process to determine if the individual meets the severity level of disability or health condition, and then the rest of it has to do with work. We did not share a slide or anything specifically related to that actual determination because you could really talk about that in and of itself for quite some time. And so we didn't really feel like we had the time to share a lot about that in this presentation. But just know that it is possible for an individual to essentially be disapproved. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but they can basically be determined not disabled at any one of those 5 points in that sequential evaluation process. And it's all related to, generally speaking, related to work activity that they're performing or have performed in the past. So I don't know if that helps in addition to the good information that Shawn already shared about that, but just so you know, that's kind of the process that the disability examiner goes through. And Shawn, you might have mentioned this, but I guess so I apologize if this is a duplication, but I guess I would also add that it's not Social Security that is making the medical determination. So Social Security, the local office, essentially collects the general information or sort of the citizenship, all of those kind of eligibility factors. And then that medical decision is actually turned over to Disability Determination Services, like Shawn mentioned. So it's a disability examiner at a different agency that most likely never talks to the individual, never talks to the parents, never, talks directly to anybody who knows anything about that individual or the impairment or the symptoms that they experience. So they are making that medical determination based on whatever it is that they receive on paper through the application process or the medical records that are collected from the providers. So it is extremely important for somehow, that disability examiner to have enough information on paper, whether it comes from the individual, the parents, or caregivers or whoever else is involved, along with the medical providers and any service providers, to sort of what we say, again, in quotations, Shawn and I use air quotes a lot, to paint the picture of how that impairments, symptoms, behaviors, all of those kinds of things affect the individual's ability to obtain and maintain substantial work when it is an adult determination.
Thank you, Shauna. Was there another question too, Jennifer?
Nope, that was it.
Okay, I was thinking you had another one lined up and I didn't want to skip over and get too far in. All right. Sorry, I just inhaled my cough drop. Critical benefit issues for youth. And we touched on these just a little bit already, but establishing and maintaining eligibility for SSI and that associated Medicaid is often a main concern for both the young adults and their families. Being able to have that benefit as well as that medical insurance is huge for most of the people who are applying for or considering applying. Understanding if they're receiving that benefit already and preparing for the age 18 redetermination process. And we'll talk a little bit later on in the presentation about that. And then understanding the switch from deeming to in-kind support and maintenance after that child has reached the age of 18 and beyond. Go ahead and we'll clarify any misunderstandings regarding the way in which disability benefits work, and then the impact of paid employment on eligibility, cash payment status, as well as those associated insurances, so Medicare and Medicaid, dependent upon the program. And then understanding the work incentives that are available, and specifically the ones designed to help students. The age 18 redetermination, of course, this review is going to take place at the age of 18. It can occur anytime within the 12 months after that age of 18 is reached. If there is a continuing disability review scheduled within that time frame, typically Social Security is going to do those together. So if I turn 18 and my continuing disability review is already scheduled for 3 months down the road, they're going to likely just do my continuing disability review and my age 18 redetermination at the same time. The outcome of that age 18 redetermination is going to affect continued eligibility for my SSI benefit and my Medicaid that is tied to my SSI. If an adverse decision is made, my SSI or supplemental security income benefits will be terminated after 2 months from that decision. Thank you. And here's where we're going to talk about the definition of disability for an adult through SSA or Social Security Administration. You'll see that top bullet point is inability to engage in substantial gainful activity. That is going to be an amount that is set by Social Security. It is a monthly amount that somebody is able to work at or not work at. So to meet the adult definition, they have to be able to engage at that level of work and earnings. The second two bullet points are therefore going to be the same as what we saw earlier for somebody even under the age of 18. It's got to be because of a medical determinable physical or mental impairment, and it needs to be expected to result in death, or that lasts or is expected to last at least 12 months. Go ahead. In Section 301, Section 301 allows for continued benefits and medical benefits for individuals who are determined to be medically recovered So they no longer meet those disability standards that we talked about. What Section 301 does is it's a protection if somebody is found at that age 18 redetermination or a continuing disability review that they no longer meet that criteria set forth by Social Security. However, they have an IEP or an IPE, which is an individual plan for employment, or an individual work plan, an IWP, with a vocational rehab center. So your state VR agencies like Nebraska VR, or Ticket to Work program, or the individual education plan with a school. And they are making progress towards meeting the goal that they have set. They can continue to receive their cash benefit until they are at that end goal. So it is Social Security essentially putting an insurance in this person that, yes, they no longer meet that disability criteria, but by allowing them to continue to receive that benefit while they work to achieve that goal, it reduces the reliance that they may have continued reliance on Social Security or drawing that Social Security disability benefit later in life. So it's helping them maintain that benefit or providing them that benefit while they work to attain that end goal. And here, in-kind support and maintenance. So we talked about at age 18, the parent to child deeming would no longer apply. However, Social Security will assess in-kind support and maintenance, and that could also impact both the eligibility for Social Security benefits and the payment amount. So in-kind support and maintenance, or ISM, is a source of countable unearned income in the form of food and shelter, and it's going to be attributed to the beneficiary that receives it. So for instance, if somebody is living with their parents or even living independently, however, their parents or somebody else is providing food and or shelter, Social Security is going to count that as an in-kind support and maintenance, and therefore reduce the amount of benefit that that person receives due to them receiving food and shelter from an outside source. Go ahead and advance. Right. And we'll touch just a little bit on ABLE accounts tonight. The ABLE accounts, or Achieving a Better Life Experience accounts, are a great resource or way for people to reduce their resources. SSI, as well as the Associated Medicaid, does have a $2,000 resource limit when you're receiving that benefit. It, of course, can be difficult for somebody if they have wage earnings as well as continuing to receive their Social Security benefit to keep their resources under that amount. The ABLE account is a way for them to be able to put money into an account that is used and works as a savings account would, but not have the funds that are in that account be counted against them as their resource. So it's excluded from that SSI resource up to $100,000. And they can contribute up to $15,000 per year into their ABLE account, or family can contribute to that ABLE account too, up to that maximum. You're fine. And the Nebraska ABLE savings does have to be established online, and we do have the web address there that you can go out and read more about the program, and if interested, sign up for that at that website as well.
Shawn, can I just ask a quick question? And I don't know if you, because it is about the ABLE accounts, but do you know, is there, so long-term thinking those accounts, and I don't know where I heard this, but if there is money that is in that account and the owner of the account, so the individual with the disability or who is receiving like different services, whether they're on a waiver or what have you, whatever money is left in that, does that then get returned to the state?
Yeah, so there has been changes to that actually in the last year. Actually, I think it was almost exactly a year ago, November of 2020. In the state of Nebraska, that Medicaid payback for an ABLE account is no longer an issue. However, if somebody does not live in Nebraska and is using even the Nebraska ABLE account, because you don't have to reside in the state that your ABLE account is set up, whatever state they reside in, there may still be. So for instance, maybe we have somebody in Council Bluffs. So I live in Iowa. If Iowa has that Medicaid payback, even though I have the Nebraska ABLE account, I would still be subject to that Medicaid payback. But if you are a resident of Nebraska using Nebraska Medicaid and you have the Nebraska ABLE program, that is no longer a thing. There is not the Medicaid payback anymore.
Okay, so that's just kind of good to know then, as far as then it's something to be aware of when you're opening an account, and checking, whatever state you may be in. We're kind of talking about Nebraska specifically, but if just kind of check into that. Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, and there is a national ABLE site too. I think you might just be able to Google national ABLE. That will allow you to compare each state's ABLE accounts and their rules.
We did have another question come up about the in-kind support.
Okay.
And is there a way for it to not get counted against, I guess, the individual? Should parents charge rent? Is there a way to not, I guess, make that count against the individual?
Yes. And either at application, if somebody is a new applicant for Social Security, or if they are already receiving but are not contributing to room and board, air quotations again, or rent, there is a way Social Security will accept, and I can't think of the title of it right now, but it's basically like a rental agreement if they live with their parents, that they are filling out and saying, let's say $400 is a fair amount. The amount that you would establish or set forth as rent is going to be similar to what you would charge somebody else if it wasn't your child or a family member. If they have access to a bedroom, a shared living room, kitchen, bathroom, and I share the household maybe with 3 or 4 people, charging them a third of what my house might be valued at, or a third of my mortgage, or a third of my total rent might be a good number. You provide that information to Social Security, and ultimately they will make the decision again on whether it is deemed fair. But typically establishing in that manner is going to be allowable, and that then doesn't have the in-kind support or the ISM charged if they are contributing their pro rata share of rent or room and board for their food and shelter. Shauna, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, this is Shauna. I guess I would just add to that it doesn't, we see it a lot happen when a child, an adult child, let's say, is living with parents, but it really is true if they're living with anyone. So it doesn't have to be like a child parent sort of situation. It can be roommate situation, or whatever the case may be. And it really is, like Shawn said, it really is, they will ask questions to understand if that is what you would charge somebody else living, in that same situation, or sharing that same space. And they really do, since SSI is for food and shelter, then they really do consider that. I guess I'll just throw out an example. I've worked with an individual who she's living in a place where her rent is actually more than her SSI payment. But that's where her parents want her to live. So even though she lives independently, her parents are are paying a portion of her rent to have her live in that place. And even though the rent is more than her SSI payment, they are still attributing the in-kind support and maintenance to her because somebody is helping her pay her food and shelter costs. So there's, you know, a lot of different things that come up, but like Shawn said, you know, one way is that if they are actually paying their fair share of the food and shelter costs ultimately, which can be all one charge as rent and can be established through that rental agreement, then it can be beneficial to both the household and to the individual to get that full benefit rate if they can.
You can go ahead and advance that. Talk about benefits counseling. So common misconceptions, and I think we touched on a few of these perhaps already, but I'll lose my SSI or SSDI check when I begin to work. If I work, I'll lose my Medicare or my Medicaid. If I don't get an SSI check, I'll lose my associated Medicaid. If I lose my benefits, I can't get them back. And if I work, Social Security will decide that I'm no longer disabled. So benefits counseling or benefits planning services, of course, are going to be individualized, address the effects that work or other life situations have on the disability and their particular benefit program, as well as address any other federal, state, or local benefits received. And I also mentioned early on exploring perhaps benefits that they might not already be receiving, but could potentially begin to receive or need to consider applying for. So why benefits counseling is important. The cash benefit and associated medical insurance are valuable resources as the individuals transition to the world of work. Early intervention and education about their benefits and the work incentives available can help prevent future problems, such as overpayments or underpayments, those crisis decisions, and incorrect eligibility determinations. If you want to go ahead. And I think now we're at work incentives, so I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to Shauna for the next part of the presentation.
All right. Thanks for being patient for a second while I got myself off of mute there. So I love talking about work. Hopefully that you find this information helpful. And again, please just share any questions that you have in the chat and we'll try to, sorry, see, now I'm already failing at my job here for not turning my camera on and sharing that. But if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat as you have been. And we'll try to address them at the time that they come up. So thank you, Shawn, for sharing all that helpful information. So we're kind of moving on now from sort of, you know, questions and information about getting eligible for benefits and how to sort of manage those resources and some of those kinds of things to, you know, what do we do with work and how to manage some of those kinds of things. And reporting guidelines and things like that. So we will hopefully share enough information with you here tonight that you'll walk away knowing that it is possible for individuals with disabilities, even if they are receiving Social Security disability or SSI benefits, to work and still maintain the benefits that they really need while they're working. So this is just sort of an introduction to SSI slide, which Shawn has shared some of this information already. being the time of year that it is, with it being, sort of the end of 2021, we do have a lot of the 2022 information available at this point. So we're kind of sharing both with you here. Some relevant to this year and the last couple, 6 or 8 weeks or whatever we have left in the year this year for 2021, and then moving on to 2022. So you'll see the federal benefit rate listed here, which, as Shawn indicated earlier, there's a maximum amount of SSI that a single individual can be eligible for, called the federal benefit rate. For 2021, the maximum amount is $794 a month for a single individual. It is going up to $841 for a single individual in January for 2022. But again, if you think about that, for food and shelter, so that is intended to cover essentially a person's entire costs of food and shelter, and then hopefully, I guess, supplemented with whatever other income that they have, or other ways that they can add to their food and shelter costs. And then Shawn did mention the $2,000 resource limit for a single individual. And again, I don't mean to duplicate what Shawn has already said, but just understand that that is in any combination of accounts. It's not $2,000 in each a savings account and a checking account and a different account. It's $2,000 total. So those ABLE accounts can be really helpful in sort of managing those resources once you become eligible. All right, go ahead with the next slide. So since we're really kind of focusing on work at this point, we want to talk a little bit about how SSI treats income, specifically earned income. And so when you think about it, with SSI being sort of a payer of last resort, or sort of a needs-based benefit, they do take almost every other form of income into account when determining how much of a SSI cash payment you get. But it can be really beneficial, or more beneficial, to have earned income than other types of income, because SSI actually counts a little less than half of the earned income when determining how much of an SSI payment a person can get. Okay, go ahead to the next slide.
Shauna, we had a question come in quick.
Sure.
How exactly are resources determined?
Okay, I'll try to answer that one. So I think what you're asking, and so correct me if this doesn't answer your question, or maybe re-ask it if this doesn't answer your question. But resources are determined by an SSI claims rep. They do, when you are eligible for SSI, you do have to provide them with bank accounts, locations, and account numbers and things like that. They do check those on a monthly basis for ongoing eligibility. And so if they see more than $2,000 in any combination of accounts, they will send out a notice letting you know that you're excess resources, or that you're over resources. But if you're asking about how it's determined as far as like what types of things count as resources, it's basically anything that can be turned into cash, essentially. So they don't count a home that you live in, they don't count one car that you drive, but they will count any other vehicles in your name as a resource. Anything, again, that can essentially be turned into cash. So checkings accounts, savings accounts, IRAs, CDs, retirement accounts. 401ks can sometimes be excluded. Some of those retirement type accounts can sometimes be excluded if they're set up a certain way, if the language is set so that you absolutely cannot withdraw that money until a certain age, and then they can be excluded until that age.
Does an enable account or a savings bond count?
A savings bond, what's that?
And also life insurance just came in.
Okay, so a savings bond would likely count. An ABLE account is federally that's not a word, statuted, I was going to say. But an ABLE account is specifically a type of account that does not count as a resource for SSI. until there is more than $100,000 in it. So if it's below $100,000 in your ABLE account, then it does not count as a resource for SSI. Once there is more than $100,000 in there, then it will count, the amount that's over the $100,000 will count towards the $2,000 resource limit. Okay. A thing I guess specifically to mention about that though is that the statutes were set or it was written so that even if somebody lost their SSI eligibility because their ABLE account had more than $100,000 in it, they could still continue Medicaid eligibility as long as the income was in the ABLE account and only used for those appropriate expenses. Life insurance policies can, as with everything, my answer to almost everything is it depends, because it seems like there's not very many things that are across the board true as a general statement when you're thinking about Social Security or SSI or Medicaid or any of those things. But generally speaking, for life insurance, if it's a term life policy where essentially nobody gets paid unless that individual passes away, then it does not count as a resource. But if an individual has like a whole life policy or a universal life policy where essentially they can withdraw money from the policy while they're still alive, then those can count as a resource. So hopefully that sort of answers all of those. It probably doesn't answer all the resource questions because there's always, something else that can come up. Something that has come up before that is just, sort of at the forefront of my mind because it came up again recently are like certain types of accounts that are set up. Maybe somebody gets a settlement from a car accident or something like that. And so they're awarded a certain amount of money to pay medical expenses, like ongoing, maybe even lifelong medical expenses and things like that. Those have to be set up a certain way so that they're not counted as a resource to the individual who has the disability. So there are a lot of times when both Shawn and I would say we're not necessarily the experts at how to set those things up or sort of those legal situations where we would say it's a good idea probably to talk to somebody, an attorney or somebody who really knows the law surrounding that and how to set those up. So
Shauna, we did have another question. If a disabled person works and contributes their own money to an ABLE account, is the money put towards the account not count towards income or just not count towards resources?
that is a great question, actually. So any money that essentially goes to the person counts as income in the month that it is received. So if it's wages or if somebody gives them money directly or anything like that, that is counted as income to the person in the month that they receive it. But then putting it in an ABLE account or in an InABLE account in Nebraska prevents it from being counted as a resource in future months. So there are some, and there are some, now it's not just the individual that can make contributions, to that ABLE account. Other family members or other, individuals can make contributions directly to the InABLE account or to the ABLE account, and that does not count as income to the individual, if that makes sense. Okay, and then it wouldn't count as a resource either. So good questions. So this slide here is really just a list essentially of the primary work incentives that an individual with SSI can utilize. Not necessarily a completely exhaustive list, but generally speaking, these are the ones that individuals utilize. So we'll talk about some of these in a little bit more detail as we go through the next slide. So we'll talk about the earned income exclusion first, if you want to go to the next slide a little bit more. I've already kind of said that a little less than half of a person's earnings count as income. And so that is different from unearned income. So that's why earnings can be more beneficial than having other types of income, because SSI doesn't count nearly as much of earnings as they do count of other types of income. So this is just kind of what I call a quick and dirty example of how that works, because it can get a lot more complicated than this. So we try to keep it simple. But in this example, you'll see the individual is earning gross earned income of $600 a month. There is a general income exclusion that applies of $20, which is taken off of that $600. And then there's an earned income exclusion of $65 and half. So if you kind of follow that calculation through, of the $600 in gross earnings, SSI would only count $257.50. Okay, that's a pretty significant difference between what the person is earning and what they're counting, even though there may be a few taxes taken out of there. Okay, but with the base SSI rate right now being $794, if SSI only takes or only withholds essentially $257.50, they're still getting an adjusted SSI payment of $536.50. So when you add all of that together, the gross earned income of $600 plus the $536.50 of SSI, now that individual has a total income of $1,136.50 instead of just $794. So you can see that working can be very beneficial to an individual's bottom line. Okay. All right, go ahead and go to the next slide. So in addition to just those general income exclusion and the earned income exclusion, there are other work incentives that can actually further reduce the amount of earned income that SSI counts. Okay. So this one is specifically for students. It's called the student earned income exclusion. And generally speaking, it's for an individual who is unmarried and under the age of 22. So these are, quote, your typical age, right? Students, not your, I can't remember what even the term is anymore, but it's not for individuals who are 22 and older, even though a lot of individuals who are 22 and older attend school. But this is specifically for individuals who are essentially age 21 or younger and regularly attending school. There is a monthly maximum and an annual maximum, but individuals who can utilize this student earned income exclusion can really earn quite a bit of money and not have it affect their SSI payment at all. So if you look at the 2021 and the 22 numbers, essentially up to $1,930 per month in earnings can be excluded for an individual who's a student right now in 2021, up to a maximum of $7,770 a year in 2021. So an individual can work and earn a good amount of money, even if they're working part-time, right? And potentially have all that earned income excluded completely up to $1,930 a month to a total of $7,770 a year. Okay.
Okay, so Shauna, I have another question.
Yeah.
So, and maybe you'll get to this, so maybe I'm jumping ahead, but is this something then like a special circumstance that you have to then apply for, or how do you know that you are eligible for this exclusion?
Good question. So this is probably the simplest, I will say, work incentive to establish with Social Security, especially as far as SSI is concerned. So you really just have to contact SSI, okay? Let them know that that you as the individual or you as the representative payee or guardian or whatever the case may be, that this individual is a student under the age of 22. Like I said, they do have to be, quote, regularly, again, here with the air quotes, right? Regularly attending school. So that would be for somebody who is grades 7 to 12, that's 12 hours a week. Okay. For somebody who is in college, it's 8 hours a week. And then if they're in like some type of training course or something like that, it's 12 to 15 hours a week. So that is what is considered regularly attending school. So typically if there's in some kind of like 18 to 21 program or something like that, that's going to count as being a student regularly attending school, as long as they're under the age of 22. And so you really just have to call Social Security, let them know, you know, again, they'll ask the person's age probably, or just confirm it in the record, let them know where they're going to school. And then they usually will ask for some kind of, you know, verification or documentation that the person is actually attending. So they might ask for like a class registration form. They might ask for a grade report, you know, at the end of the semester or something like that. And they don't have to attend school in the summer. They just have to have attended in the spring and then be registered for the fall. Okay. And so then those summer months still count, or they can still utilize that student earned income exclusion during the summer, even though they may not be, quote, attending school until this, you know, until the fall again. So it works really nicely for individuals who maybe work a few hours or maybe not even at all during the school year, but then during the summer, maybe they work more, or they work even more than they did, you know, when they were actually attending school. So being able to exclude those higher amounts can be really beneficial, you know, during those summer months when there might be earning more money than normal. And then for 2022, the exclusion allowance is actually going up. So it'll be up to $2,040 per month that can be excluded, and then up to $8,230 for the whole year. So that's pretty darn decent, like to be able to earn up to a little over $8,200 a year and not have it affect your SSI at all. So if you're able to utilize the student earned income exclusion, then a lot of times the earned income exclusion doesn't even apply because there's no earnings left, you know, to apply it to. It's already excluded under this particular work incentive. Right.
Okay, we have had a question come in.
Yes.
And you may have covered this, but I just want to recap.
Okay.
So would the student get their $794 per month on top of the $1,930?
So if this is not an amount that they receive from SSI, but yes, if they are earning $1,930 a month, that is excluded, then yes. And if that's all the other income they have, if they only have earnings and they're earning, you know, $1,930, which is all excluded under this particular exclusion, then they would still get their full $794 SSI payment.
Okay, and then we had a comment coming in. It says being enrolled in an 18 to 21 transition program qualifies for student earned income exclusion as well.
Yes. I would say generally speaking, I mean, again, like I hate to speak in like complete, you know, black and white or complete generalities. But yes, typically an 18 to 21 program will count as regularly attending school as long as they meet those hour requirements, which is like 12 hours a week.
Okay. And then we had a question come in a slide ago, so I apologize.
That's okay.
It says, if I have a will that my child with disabilities is a beneficiary to receive the funds in a special needs trust, is this protected from being counted as a resource?
It can be, yes. Again, all I can say is it depends. As long as the special needs trust is written properly to be excluded by Medicaid, then yes, it would be excluded by Medicaid. Because typically they're set up as special needs trust so that the person themselves doesn't have access to that money. There's like an executor or something like that that actually controls that money and has access to it. But I would not say that just having a special needs trust means that it will be excluded from Medicaid. It really has to be written in a way that Medicaid will exclude it. So that's where we say, talk to an attorney or a financial planner who really knows those, the legal jargon that has to be included in that special needs trust language so that it would be excluded for Medicaid purposes. Good question. Thanks, Jennifer. Okay, so that's sort of the student earned income exclusion. So if we go on to the next slide, we'll talk about impairment related work expenses. So I didn't actually put the acronym, which is kind of surprising on here, but you might hear, if you're familiar with Social Security or DHHS, or if you've talked to them at all, you hear acronyms all the time. So this time I actually neglected to put the acronym in here, but you might hear Social Security or SSI refer to IRWEs, IRWE, which is impairment related work expenses. And this is another exclusion or another work incentive essentially, or a way for SSI to reduce the amount of countable earnings a person has when determining how much of an SSI payment they're going to get. So this is kind of the rules essentially for what can qualify as an impairment related work expense. It has to be related to a documented disability, not necessarily the disability of record for Social Security, but just a documented disability or health condition. So not that it applies often to young adults or transition age youth, but one I use often as an example for that is like high blood pressure medicine. So high blood pressure is not typically a disability of record, but it could be a documented impairment or health condition by a medical professional. And so those can still be counted as sort of that documented disability, or they can meet that documented disability criteria. They have to be needed in order to work. They have to be paid by the beneficiary and not reimbursed by someone else. The expense has to be reasonable, and it has to be paid in the month that the person was working. So essentially, and I think on the next slide, there's some examples of what we typically see as impairment related work expenses. Oh, maybe not. Okay, so I guess I'll just, if we go back to the previous slide, I'll give you some examples. So what we see typically are things like out-of-pocket medication expenses, co-pays for doctor visits or routine medical expenses that people have, transportation costs. If somebody has to pay for job coaching, that could be an impairment related work expense. Essentially, really, I encourage people to think out of the box. I've mentioned some typical ones, but really it could be anything that is related to the person's impairment and needed in order to work. And it's an expense that they have to pay out of their own pocket that can reduce their countable earnings. What's that, Jennifer?
Sorry, would this like include an Uber if they needed it to get to work?
So good question. Uber can count as an impairment related work expense because theoretically it's a transportation cost, right? So if the individual for whatever reason is not able to drive themselves or doesn't have their own vehicle to drive, then it can count as an impairment related work expense. I guess I would say, as I said earlier, with almost everything, it just depends on the situation. As long as the expense is reasonable for that community, then it can be allowed as an impairment related work expense. But it is somewhat subjective up to the claims rep that is making that determination, because there's nothing in the regulations that says this for sure is allowed, this for sure is allowed, this for sure is allowed. And there's nothing that sets a specific limit or amount. So there's just guidance in there that allows the claims representative making the determination to have some flexibility in what they will allow or not allow. And I guess, I just want to bring that up because just again, recently I've the Uber thing specifically came up. And so somebody was actually using that as a cost comparative for impairment related work expenses for what they would pay a driver to drive them from Plattsmouth to Omaha to work. Well, for an Uber, it's like $47 or something one way. So they were thinking that if they paid, you know, a friend or whoever to drive them and paid them that amount, that would be considered reasonable. But Social Security did not consider that reasonable. So in generally speaking, yes, I've had other individuals who've used Uber and Lyft to get to and from work. And Social Security has allowed those expenses, but it was within a smaller community. You know, it was like within the city of Lincoln, and they lived within the city of Lincoln. So I would say always ask. And, you know, you may be able to provide some justification for what should or should not be counted, but just know that it's not necessarily a yes or no answer all the time. You might have to provide some justification for what you're asking for. Did you have something else, Jennifer?
Yes. Somebody just asked, how do you receive the reimbursement for these expenses? Do you submit a claim each month?
So they're not actually reimbursed expenses. Okay. They are just a way for SSI to reduce the amount of income, of earned income that is counted when they are determining how much of an SSI payment the person gets. So where I told you that slide that we looked at that showed the very simple calculation, the earned income exclusion and how that sort of works, that's just a part of the calculation that Social Security, that SSI uses to determine a person's payment amount. There's a line item, essentially budget or calculation that SSI goes through to determine how much of that earned income they count to determine that adjusted SSI payment. So what happens with impairment related work expenses is that, let's say you pay $100 a month in transportation costs. Well, based on where that falls in the calculation, what ends up happening is that you essentially get to keep an extra $50 in your SSI payment. So where, you know, you still have to pay the $100 out of pocket, they're not really reimbursing you for paying that $100, but they are allowing you to keep an extra $50 in your SSI payment to sort of recover some of the cost that you expended. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Sort of.
No, it does. And they replied, they said they got it.
Okay, perfect.
So yes, thank you.
Sometimes go ahead.
Go ahead. There was another question. Somebody asked, does this pertain to any age group?
Yes. Impairment related work expenses, it doesn't matter the age. So where student earned income exclusion is really the only one that has a specific age relevance. So they just have to be a student age 21 or younger, but impairment related work expenses, if they're eligible as an adult, it doesn't matter how old they are. As long as they're the ones that are paying the expense, nobody else is reimbursing them, it's reasonable, and they're paying it in the month that they're working. Okay. All right, really good questions. All right, go ahead and go to the next slide. So this one, I guess I will go ahead and leave it on this slide, but I guess I will add, I just want to mention from the last slide about thinking about impairment related work expenses. I didn't specifically put a slide in here talking about blind work expenses, but just in case, I will mention that individuals who are considered statutorily blind, so not just blind as determined by, you know, a medical provider or something like that, but they actually have to have a statutory blind determination by Social Security, on their record. Those individuals qualify for blind work expenses. So in addition to everything that qualifies as an impairment related work expense, they also get to deduct other work expenses, which aren't necessarily related to their disability or to being blind. They get to deduct their federal, state income taxes. They get to deduct meals that they consume at work, childcare expenses, all kinds of things. So not that anybody would wish blindness on anyone, but those individuals who do have a statutory blind determination do have a significant amount of work incentives, especially when they're SSI eligible. So, okay, and then this slide talks about plans to achieve self-support. Or you might have heard it referred to as PASS. This is a work incentive that allows an individual to set aside some of their own income or resources to help them achieve a specific work goal. So this, in a sense, is another way that individuals can set aside money, have money in an account that does not count as a resource for SSI or Medicaid, okay? But it really is an account that is specifically set up to set aside certain monies to help pay for items or services that they need in order to achieve a specific work goal. So this just gives you sort of a synopsis of what that entails or what that looks like. But the plan must have a realistic work goal. There must be a specific plan or a specific account set up to save the money and to use the money. And then it also includes like sort of setting up it's listed here as sequential steps or like milestones, if you will, for what that person is going to do to achieve that work goal. So some of the things that we see, you know, again, typically, but people can think out of the box for past plans used for are things like maybe purchasing a vehicle. So it's a way that people can actually set aside money and build up money to purchase a vehicle. And it doesn't count as a resource for SSI or Medicaid purposes, or maybe to help them pay for school to achieve a work goal, and really any school related expenses. So you see, you know, tuition, books, fees, internet, you know, a lot of those kinds of things. But we also see them utilized for setting up a person's own business or a self-employment venture for like startup costs and things like that. So there's lots of ways that plans to achieve self-support can be utilized as well. But the key really is having a sort of specific work goal and specific items or services that are needed in order to achieve that work goal. And then having income or resources, some money to set aside into that account. But it cannot be SSI. So SSI cannot be used as the money to fund the PASS, but other types of income that would normally affect SSI eligibility can be used to fund the PASS, which allows the person to get SSI and have money to live on. Okay.
So Shauna, does that that income or those assets that are then set aside, do they have to be like in a separate account, or is there anything, can it just be basically blanketly said that I'm trying to save $2,000 to start my business?
It will definitely be a separate account. Yeah, it will definitely be a separate account that is really only used for the money that's funding the PASS and for the approved PASS expenses. Otherwise, it really would be a nightmare for everyone to try to keep, you know, straight what money's supposed to go in there and what the money's supposed to be used for and those kinds of things. And those PASS plans do get reviewed typically every 6 months, sometimes once a year, and people will have to submit bank statements, receipts, all of those kinds of things. So it really is just better anyway for it to be a completely separate account. But it can be a savings account or it can be a checking account. It can be whatever type of account the individual wants. But yes, definitely separate. That's a good question. Thank you for asking that. Okay. All right, so that kind of covers, again, generally not an exhaustive list and certainly not an exhaustive discussion on work incentives, but it does cover some of the basics. Please feel free to ask questions if you have more. But we're going to move on and talk a little bit about SSI and Medicaid. As Shawn indicated before, you know, SSI kind of comes along with Medicaid, right? So in our state, it's not automatic. It's categorical. So a person does actually have to fill out an application for Medicaid in our state. But if you become eligible for SSI, then you can become eligible for Medicaid. You just have to fill out the application. Okay. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is one of the, I mean, all the work incentives are important, but I think this is one of the most important or significant, I guess, work incentives. And just a great reminder for individuals that it really can be beneficial for people to work and maintain the benefits and services that they really need. Okay. And need is sort of a word that means different things to different people, right? So, you know, that's a consideration for the individual or the family. But 1619B Medicaid allows a person to work. And even if their SSI payment is reduced to zero because of their earnings. So we've talked about all these work incentives and things that can reduce the SSI payment, and that there's an earned income exclusion, and they calculate, you know, they count less than half of that earned income against an individual. But even if a person works enough that their SSI payment is reduced to zero, they can still maintain their Medicaid eligibility with earnings below the state threshold amount. And in Nebraska for 2021, the state threshold amount is $44,627 a year. That's a lot more money than $794 a month of an SSI cash payment. So can the SSI cash payment be reduced? Yes. And it will be reduced based on the countable portion of their income, right? But a person can work. So if you ever hear a person say, I cannot work because I get SSI, or I cannot work because I will lose Medicaid, that is not an accurate statement. Okay. A person can work and earn a lot of money and still maintain their Medicaid eligibility through 1619B. The resource limits do still apply. So they still have to maintain that $2,000 resource limit as an individual. And then again, just as sort of an addition or a side note, individuals can actually set an individualized state threshold if their own individual Medicaid expenditures are more than the state threshold amount. So we work with individuals who say have Medicaid expenditures that are $60,000, $70,000 a year, right? Especially if they get personal assistance services or some of those kinds of things. Those individuals can set individualized thresholds through SSI and make up to that amount and still maintain their Medicaid through 1619B. Did you have something, Jennifer?
Questions.
Okay.
Yes. So do you have to apply for the 1619B, or is it automatic?
Great question. So I really do think I included a slide this time on the Medicaid use test. But one thing to know, that's a great question, because 1619B, even though it allows you to keep your Medicaid, it is an SSI determination. So it's not a Medicaid determination through Department of Health and Human Services. 1619B is an SSI provision, so it is SSI that makes that determination. So when a person is reporting their income, which we'll talk about a little bit, when a person is reporting their wages and that SSI payment gets reduced to 0, then there will be sort of an interview, I guess, you might call it, where an SSI claims rep will ask these 3 questions. It's called the Medicaid use test, and a person must answer yes to at least one of these questions in order to be put in 1619B status. I would say typically most people would probably answer yes to all 3 of these questions, but you have to answer yes to at least one. And so those questions are, did you use Medicaid in the last 12 months? Do you expect to use Medicaid in the next 12 months? And if you should become ill or injured in the next 12 months, would you need Medicaid? Okay. And so typically that conversation, let's say, or interview is initiated by SSI. So they will usually, contact that individual. They'll either send them a notice in the mail, or they will contact that individual to kind of go through that process and ask those 3 questions, conduct that Medicaid use test to determine, and then put them in 1619B eligibility. And SSI, or Social Security, and the Department of Health and Human Services do interface with each other. And so the Department of Health and Human Services can see essentially if a person is either SSI eligible in current pay, or they can see if that person is in 1619B status, and then they know to continue that person's Medicaid based on that eligibility criteria. So I would say that does generally happen, automatically once the SSI rep puts the person in 1619B status. Very rarely is there a problem with the person's Medicaid. I've been doing this work for almost 22 years, and I can think of maybe enough times on one hand that it's happened where I've had to contact SSI and or Medicaid to get it straightened out when the person should have been in 1619B status and the Medicaid wasn't continued for some reason. So it's just very rare that happens. Usually it's a pretty smooth thing, and that's continued without any problems.
Okay, does the 1619B also apply to the Medicaid HCBS waivers?
So as long as the person remains Medicaid eligible, then they can stay eligible for the waivers, for their waiver. Okay, I think that's what you're asking. So if they are in 1619B status through SSI and their Medicaid is continued, then really the waiver only sees that the person is still Medicaid eligible, right? And so the waiver continues, again, usually without, any issues. So that's really the key, is just staying Medicaid eligible, whether it's through SSI as a current pay status or as 1619B status. As long as that Medicaid continues, then the waiver services continue. Do you think that answers it?
Can a person be eligible for Medicaid without SSI eligibility?
Yes, and we will talk about that. So that is a good question.
And we have just kind of a general question here.
Okay.
Currently, work private health insurance allows for coverage for children up to the age of 26.
Right.
Is it best to keep the disabled child on the parent's insurance and then have the child apply for Medicaid after the age of 26?
All I can say is it depends, and you have to make the decision for yourself and for your family. There really is not necessarily one best option for every person, right? Or that is the same, I should say, for every person. So you really have to evaluate sort of what's best for you. Or for that individual. Yes, people can stay on their parents' insurance until age 26. They can have Medicaid as secondary coverage. And part of the consideration is not just maybe whether they need Medicaid at the time, but Medicaid can help cover some of those secondary costs that aren't necessarily covered by a primary insurance company, through an employer. So overall, it saves the individual and or the family money, or it can. But the other thing sometimes to consider is whether or not that Medicaid eligibility has a tie to something else, like waiver services, right? So a person needs to apply for waiver, depending on what type of waiver, they're applying for. Sometimes there's a waiting list, for that waiver eligibility, or to get those services, to get access to those funds and those services. And so sometimes the sooner a person is eligible for Medicaid, the smoother that sort of process goes. Or when the person does become eligible for a waiver, then the Medicaid is already there, some of those kinds of things. So timing sometimes can be a factor in determining, if a person should apply for Medicaid and some of those kinds of things. So there really isn't necessarily a best option that is the same best option for every person or every situation. But those are definitely some of the things to consider when you're trying to figure out what is the best option for your loved one, or for your, you yourself or your family. And I guess I can say now, there's a slide later that kind of talks about some of the different services that are available through Easterseals. Shawn has already kind of talked about how she works with transition age youth and young adults and their families to help them sort of navigate some of those decisions, and not decide for you what's best for your family, but at least present you with the options so that you can decide, for yourself what's best. But there are other resources and other organizations that have really good information too. We often refer individuals to MMI. We often refer individuals to PTI. There are other organizations out there that we try to connect people with too. We're certainly not the sole owners of the wealth of information that is needed for families. But I hope that at least helps sort of answer that question, and maybe provide a little bit of guidance there. Okay, so I will talk about other ways to be eligible for Medicaid in just a couple of minutes. So I'm going to hold off on that one for just a couple of minutes. So this is SSI 1619B Medicaid. Hopefully answers those waivers questions, and then we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. The Medicaid use test we've covered. And so now we're going to talk about Social Security disability, which, as Shawn mentioned earlier, this is not only for an individual who is insured on their own work record, but maybe an individual that gets a payment based on the insured status of a parent. So what they call a disabled adult child, or somebody who qualifies off of their parent's record. So this is basically, again, not to sort of reiterate what Shauna has already said, but just as kind of a review quick, I guess, these are individuals that have paid into Social Security, so they've worked. They're considered insured, and they're either insured on their own work record or a parent's. But one of the things I like to make sure people know is when people are young, they become insured on their own work record, or can become insured on their own work record very, very quickly. So I'd have to look it up to remember for sure, but I think it's under the age of 24, I want to say. And Shawn, you can maybe correct me if I'm wrong. You only have to have 6 quarters of coverage to be considered insured. So you can earn 6 quarters of coverage in like a year and a half time, or a couple years worth of time. So it is possible that individuals who may be SSI eligible at age 18, and maybe they only get SSI, if they work, even if they only work part-time, they're paying into Social Security, they're paying into their own work record essentially, and they can become insured on their own work record fairly quickly. It might be a smaller benefit amount, so they may still get an SSI supplement. But I guess I just want to say that because, you know, sometimes people get surprised, like, he or she is only, you know, 22 or 23. How can they be insured on their own record? Well, because they've been working. So even if they're only, you know, working part-time, they can still become insured on that work record. So essentially anybody who's eligible for this type of benefit is eligible for what we call like work incentive phases. So to add to the complexity of a person's situation, it's complex enough sometimes when an individual only gets SSI and only has those considerations, but then sometimes individuals will have both SSDI and SSI, and they count income differently and they look at income differently, and the work incentives are different. So this is specifically related to that Title II benefit. And if you go ahead and go to the next slide, it'll talk a little bit more about that trial work period or the trial work level. Again, this conversation could go on for a while, so I don't want to take up too much time talking about it, considering we're already kind of getting ready to wind down here. But just know the trial work period is a period of 9 months, but they don't have to be consecutive months. Social Security looks at the amount of income a person earns from a job. It could be one job, it could be multiple jobs. It doesn't matter. They just look at the total earnings to determine if a person is using those trial work months. The trial work level for 2021 is $940 a month. And then for 2022, it's $970 a month. And so essentially, if a person works and earns a total of $940 a month or more, Social Security is going to count a trial work month. They have 9 of those available. And then after those trial work months, Social Security uses a different level of income to determine if they continue to get the cash payment or not. So if you go to the next slide, there it talks about substantial gainful activity. One of the primary things to know about that trial work period is that while you're working in that, it doesn't matter how much income you have, you still get your full Social Security disability or that Title II cash payment. Once you've used or move out of that trial work phase, then Social Security uses substantial gainful activity to determine if you get that cash payment or not. So where SSI is an adjusted payment amount, this is an all or nothing benefit. You either get the benefit or you don't. So substantial gainful activity, if you go to the next slide, for 2021 is $1,310 a month. So essentially that means if a person is working and earning over that amount, they would not receive their Social Security disability or that Title II cash payment. So you can see this is different, right, than SSI. Counted differently. There's different income guidelines, you know, and things like that. Not that you have to remember all of this or how it works. Just know that there are different ways of thinking or different work incentives that apply to the different types of benefits. And that's one of the reasons benefits counseling is important, as Shawn indicated earlier, because we can sort of help you navigate those different benefits, the work incentives, and how they apply to your situation. Okay. All right, go ahead and go to the next slide. This just lists the 2022 SGA amounts. It's going up $40 a month starting in January. Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. These are some work incentives that apply on the Title II side. Again, not going to go into too much description of these, but just know this is again a way that Social Security can reduce the amount of countable income. So this is another reason, like we give you the income guidelines and we talk about these things, but understand that there's always ways that Social Security can look at countable income versus gross income, which means that people get to keep more of a cash payment. Okay. SSDI comes with Medicare after 24 months, like Shawn indicated. And then if you go to the next slide, you'll see that people who are Title II eligible or eligible for Social Security disability can also be eligible for Medicaid. You don't have to be eligible for SSI or SSDI to be eligible for Medicaid, but you do have to meet a category of eligibility for Medicaid purposes. And someone who is SSDI eligible or Title II eligible would meet essentially categories of Medicaid where individuals with disabilities qualify, because that Social Security determination means that they meet that, medical eligibility. So there are some different ways that people who are Social Security disability eligible can be eligible for Medicaid. You'll see on here, it lists the federal poverty level. Sometimes you'll hear things like a spend down or a share of cost, which are ways, again, that somebody might technically be over the income guideline for Medicaid, but it's a way for them to become eligible for Medicaid based on spending down or sharing in the cost of their Medicaid. There's Medicaid insurance for workers with disabilities. And then there's also such a thing as special Medicaid beneficiary status. There's more than one way a person can be considered a special Medicaid beneficiary, but I guess one of the reasons we like to mention this is because individuals who may be eligible for SSI as an adult, and then they have a parent who retires and starts claiming Social Security, or becomes disabled and starts claiming Social Security, or dies, then those individuals who were SSI eligible can become eligible for a benefit off of their parents' work record, or that CDB benefit as a disabled adult child. And maybe that CDB benefit was enough that they are no longer eligible for SSI. So it kind of dropped their tie to Medicaid, theoretically, right? If they're no longer SSI eligible, then they could lose Medicaid, but this specific provision, I guess, if you will, allows those individuals to continue Medicaid, even though they're not getting SSI anymore. Okay.
Okay, Shauna, I have, sorry, because this pertains, I've actually had a family that I was working with that had this exact situation, and where a parent had died, and there was a benefit, which then caused the now adult child to lose their SSI and Medicaid. So how do they, because I did not, this is new information for me. So the special Medicaid beneficiary status, how do you obtain that?
Well, that's a good question. So oftentimes, well, I guess I don't have any statistics because I don't know who all is out there, right? But I know that this is something, what I can say is this is something that we often help individuals establish. So sometimes it's already been established before we start working with them. But this is one of the primary things that we screen for when somebody is receiving that benefit off of their parents' record, is we specifically screen for, were they receiving SSI prior to becoming eligible for that benefit, and then connecting with Medicaid to make sure they do have it set up like that. There's not necessarily a standard way that people get that established, because Social Security and Health and Human Services don't talk to each other that way, right? Like, there's nothing specific between those two agencies necessarily that say, hey, this person lost SSI because they just started getting this benefit. Now you need to continue their Medicaid, under this special provision. That just doesn't really happen. But there are Medicaid workers that are familiar enough with that provision that sometimes it does get established. But I would say, if a person is in that situation where they were SSI eligible, but they lost it because of starting to get that benefit off of a parent's record, if that individual or the parent or the caregiver or whoever assists that individual, if they are not able to do it for themselves, should contact Health and Human Services and specifically ask for the disabled adult child provision or budget. Because even though Social Security used to call that benefit a disabled adult child benefit, or DAC, DAC for short, Social Security changed their terminology. Health and Human Services did not. So they still refer to it as a DAC individual or a DAC budget, disabled adult child. So if somebody can call Medicaid and specifically ask for that provision or consideration, there are specific workers that do those budgets and can help get that established. Again, it gets, if they're not working and they have no other income, that it can be, fairly simple to get through that process, and that can be established. But then when work becomes involved or other types of income, it can get a little bit more complex in just helping to make sure that Medicaid does continue as it's supposed to. So again, just one more reason to talk with someone who can provide you, accurate and information and guidance on the implications of work, whether it's Easterseals or another, benefits counseling provider, so that you can understand what really should or should not be happening, so that you know how to advocate with Health and Human Services, or so that they can advocate for you when needed. So does that answer it, Rhonda? Okay, perfect. And then I will also mention, I think the next slide maybe, hopefully this is just a little bit more, I guess I kind of got ahead of myself, talks about the spend down in different ways. But I do also just want to make reference to the Medicaid insurance for workers with disabilities. Is the next slide maybe? Nope, go to reporting income. So if we go back to that last slide, I guess, when we think about Medicaid insurance for workers with disabilities, so we've already talked about different ways that SSI individuals are eligible for Medicaid, or former groups of SSI eligible individuals can stay eligible for Medicaid. Medicaid insurance for workers with disabilities is, it's been around for a long time, but it was essentially just reformed as of October 1st. And I cannot tell you how excited I am about this. So this is something that we, and when I say we, I mean a group of us advocates, have been working on literally for like 18 to 20 years. It's finally made its mark, and we're finally seeing the improvements and implementation here in October of 2021. But this is essentially a program for individuals who are SSDI eligible, or maybe not eligible for Social Security benefits, but have a disability and meet that medical eligibility to work and still maintain their Medicaid eligibility and access to those waivers and everything like we were talking about earlier. This is truly a work incentive. It is for individuals who want to work, and even work substantially or significantly, however you want to look at it. And a person could even be working full time and maintain their Medicaid eligibility through this program. They can do that through 1619B2, but these folks on SSDI, or maybe those folks who have worked their way off of Social Security benefits, this is a way for them to maintain that Medicaid eligibility and work. So, okay. So is there any other questions that have come in about Medicaid specifically before we kind of go on? Okay.
Yes, sorry. So just for clarification, so the individual still needs to reapply for Medicaid if that individual starts receiving SSI, correct?
So they don't necessarily need to reapply if they're already eligible. I don't know if that's what they're asking, but if a person is Medicaid eligible when they become SSI eligible, they don't need to reapply for Medicaid. If they are just initially becoming SSI eligible and they are not yet eligible for Medicaid, then they would need to reapply. Then they would need to apply. Do you think that's what they're asking?
So more clever. I had to reapply for my son, receive the application in the mail when he started receiving SSDI.
Okay, so so that is a situation where I guess that's why I was saying earlier, it's good to be aware that a person can become eligible for a benefit off of their own work record, and that becoming eligible for SSDI on their own work record can affect their eligibility for SSI and Medicaid. So if they are, if they essentially lose SSI because of becoming eligible for a benefit off of their own work record, then yes, they typically would have to reapply for Medicaid, because Medicaid needs to determine, or HHS needs to determine if they can qualify for Medicaid in a different way, because they no longer have SSI. They're not a special Medicaid beneficiary if it's off of their own work record, only if it's off of a parent's work record. And so they need to see if they qualify for Medicaid in one of these other programs, if you will, either the 100% federal poverty level, or what they call straight Medicaid or regular Medicaid, or possibly Medicaid insurance for workers with disabilities. So they can still be eligible for Medicaid. It would potentially just be in a different way. And yes, they would have to essentially apply or reapply for that.
They messaged back in the chat. He became eligible for SSDI because this person started receiving Social Security.
Okay, so I guess I would just, it's all in the terminology and making sure that we're all speaking the same language, essentially, right? So SSDI is Social Security Disability Insurance, which is a benefit paid off of your own work record. Social Security CDB, or Childhood Disability Benefit, is a benefit paid to a disabled adult child off of a parent's work record. Okay, so if your son is now eligible for a benefit off of your work record as his parent, then it's possible he could qualify as a special Medicaid beneficiary. Okay, like we were talking about earlier, if he was eligible for SSI before. So the timing and those kinds of things have to be verified. So I guess I can't say for sure that that's how he would qualify, but what I can say is if you contact Shawn, and her contact information will be on the last slide. If you contact her or myself, then we can probably help you figure out if that's how that situation should apply for him, or if he could be considered a special Medicaid beneficiary, because it's possible he could. I just can't say for sure without looking into it more. Okay. All right. So so that again is just kind of, there's so many questions and so many situations that, we could literally go on and on and on talking about these things, but I do want to be respectful of everybody's time. So if you have other questions, please feel free to ask. But let's go ahead and move on so we can get through the rest of the slides here. Hopefully there's not too much more, but I just want to make sure and cover these last little pieces if we can. So now that we've talked about Medicaid and work incentives and working, and you've heard all of this great stuff, hopefully, about how people can actually work and still maintain the benefits that they need. One of the key things, like Shawn talked about earlier, is just reporting when it's needed. So adopting some kind of system for reporting income, whether it's the individual themselves or the representative payee or guardian or conservator or whatever your role is, whoever is helping that individual if they're not doing it for themselves, just maintaining that system of where do pay stubs belong, how do I keep them, how long do I keep them, all of those kinds of things. Because what I will tell you is that there are some different ways, and we'll talk about some of those different ways that you can actually report to Social Security or SSI, but it is not unusual for them to ask you for those pay stubs or that wage verification or all of that same information that you've already submitted more than one time. So just because you have submitted it doesn't mean they won't ask you for it again. So just keep a system, keep copies for yourself, all of those kinds of things, so that if Social Security or Health and Human Services or whoever asks you for that information again, you have a record of when you reported it, how you reported it, and you have a copy of the same information, so you could submit another copy if you need to. Okay. All right, go ahead and go to the next slide. So that's just general. I won't go into all of the like nitty gritty details that are on these slides because they're kind of similar for each one, but there is an importance to reporting no matter what type of benefit a person gets, no matter what Social Security tells you. So they might tell you you don't have to report it every month. They might tell you only to report when changes happen, but that all creates some miscommunications sometimes, and people end up in overpayments and underpayments more often than not. So to protect yourself, to protect the individuals, just report at least on a monthly basis, regardless of what Social Security tells you. But for SSI specifically, you really have to report changes in any type of income, but specifically for wages. One of the easiest ways is if you have a My Social Security account, you can report that way just by uploading pay stubs or wage verifications through that portal, and it goes directly into the record. There are other ways you can report too. Some people still like paper, so they might get pay stubs and they might report those either by mail or by fax, and some of those kinds of things to their local office. But Social Security really strongly encourages people to report via that online My Social Security account for SSI. And it is important to report hopefully by the 10th of each month, if not before that. So the 10th of the month following the month the wages were paid. There's also a mobile app and a telephone reporting option for SSI, where you can report wages, which works as long as the only thing you have to report is gross earnings. If you have any impairment related work expenses that you have receipts for or anything like that, it will not work to report it through the portal or the wage app or the telephone. You have to do that on paper still and report either in person or through the mail. Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. This is for SSDI or that CDB off of a parent's record. Again, just report changes when income changes or when work changes, those kinds of things. Still, Social Security would recommend reporting through that online portal if possible. For the Title II side, you don't have the option of the telephone reporting or the mobile wage app. You can do it through the online Social Security portal, or you can do it through mail or fax. Okay. Excuse me. But I will say, just know the Social Security offices are still closed to the public. Most of the staff are still working remotely. So if you report by mail or by fax, they are not necessarily doing anything with those very time efficiently, because those are going to the offices and there's not necessarily anybody there to do all the work to develop those. And then the next slide is just, if you get both, just be aware, if somebody gets both Title II and SSI, that you do have to report to those groups separately in most cases. Some of the smaller offices out in more rural Nebraska, it's the same claims rep that does both Title II and Title 16, but Omaha, Lincoln for sure, and Grand Island, if those are the offices that are your local office, they do have different claims reps for Title II and for SSI. So you do have to report those separately, unless you're using the online portal, and then that can report to both programs at once. Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. Again, this is just a list of the different ways that Social Security, that's going to be really loud, sorry. That I'm going to close my door really quick. Sorry about that. It's kind of loud. These are the different ways that we collaborate with other agencies to provide benefits counseling services. Not that you have to know all of these ways, but just know, as Shawn said, we do provide some services specific to transition age youth and young adults. We work with both Nebraska VR and the Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired, so their counselors can refer directly to us for benefits counseling services. We do have a contract with the Social Security Administration. If you've ever heard of the Work Incentives Planning and Assistance Project, or WIPA, we do have that for both the state of Nebraska and for the state of Kansas. So, and then we are a part of the Aging and Disability Resource Center. And we also are an employment network with the Ticket to Work program. So essentially, for anybody age 14 and older who receives Social Security disability or SSI benefits, or may want to help assistance in applying for those types of benefits, we can very likely provide services regardless of where you are in the state of Nebraska. Our 800 number is there. We try to be a one-stop shop and just screen for which program is the best fit for each individual. So just give us a call and we'll try to get you connected. And then I think just the last couple of slides are, one is a resource slide. I just put a couple of, I guess there's a work is possible slide. So I've kind of already gotten on my soapbox a little bit about that. Just want people to know that it is possible to work and there are ways to keep the benefits that you need. There are some resources listed on there, the Social Security website and the Easterseals website. And then the last slide is just the contact information for Shawn and myself. It is our office numbers and then our email addresses. So if you have questions or concerns, or you want to know how we might be able to help, please give one of us a call and we're happy to help you ourselves, get you connected to somebody who can help within our agency, or at least connect you to some resources that can be helpful. And we're running right at the end of time here. So I'll see if there's any last minute questions, but otherwise I really appreciate all of your time tonight and hopefully you found the information helpful.
We have one final question that I think might be a perfect ending.
Okay.
So SSI, SSDI, Medicaid, and working incentives are so complicated. Glad Easterseals in Nebraska is a resource to understand these. Is there a wait list for the benefits planning services through Easterseals? And is there a cost to families?
Great question. So I would say, as far as the cost to families, there's no out-of-pocket cost, okay, for any of our services. Somehow, some way, through one of our programs, the services are provided at no cost to you. Now, if it comes, who the funding source for that service is depends on where the referral comes from or what program you fit into. So both the Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired and Nebraska VR can pay for services. That's why the referral comes directly from them. Otherwise, it's our, agreement with the Aging and Disability Resource Center or our agreement with Social Security or whatever the case may be. So that's why we say, just call us. We'll find which program is the right fit for you. We can provide the services at no cost to you, regardless of where you are in the state. And then was there another part to that question that I didn't necessarily answer?
Nope, that was it. Just lots of comments. Thank you so much for all the information, and that everybody's enjoyed the presentation. Gotten a lot out of it.
Good, glad to hear it. Hopefully it's helpful to you all.
I would second that as well. I think I'm kind of just trying to process all of the information. I'm so glad that Shawn and Shauna were able to come and visit with us tonight and share this information. I do want to quickly throw up the poll and the survey. So if you wouldn't mind taking a few minutes just to fill that out. But I do think this has been a really, really helpful kind kind of overview of the things that are available. And it's really great to know that there are individuals like yourself that can help us kind of find our way through these kind of complicated programs to make sure that we're finding the right services and getting all of the benefits that our loved ones are entitled to. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and I guess I would just add real quick, because I just remembered there was a part about a waiting list. There, for most of our programs, there is not, quote, a waiting list. We may not, for benefits counseling services, a lot of times we can't answer your questions right then the first time that you call, because we may have to verify some things first with Social Security or Health and Human Services or whatever to be able to provide appropriate and accurate guidance. But there's really not a waiting list per se for services. So just call us and we'll try to help you as quickly and as efficiently as we can.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you to our participants for joining us this evening. It was jam-packed with a lot of information, but we got through it all. Again, if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to Shawn or Shauna or Jennifer or myself, and we'll pretty much probably direct you to that Shawn and Shauna. But I'm very happy to help in any way that we can. And please let us know in the chat if you have any other suggestions or questions, and we will do our best to answer those. But thank everyone so much for coming this evening. This has been great. I really appreciate it. Thank you.